My name is Miranda, and I'm 34 years old. I teach fourth grade at a small elementary school in Colorado Springs. Last Thursday afternoon, I came home early to find my husband David and our neighbor Stephanie together in our master bathroom's bathtub. The sounds of their intimate laughter floated through the door as I stood frozen in the hallway. My mind didn't explode with rage like you might expect. Instead, it became crystal clear, calculating. I quietly turned the lock on the bathroom door from the outside and stepped back. Before I continue this story, I want to know where you're watching from today. Please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. What would you do if you caught your spouse cheating? Let me take you back through my 15-year journey with David and how one locked door changed everything. 16 years ago, I met David at a small coffee shop in downtown Denver. I was finishing my teaching degree at the University of Colorado, and he was already working as a software engineer for a tech startup. He had this boyish charm with dark hair that constantly fell into his eyes, and a smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. Our first conversation lasted 4 hours. We talked about everything from our favorite hiking trails in Rocky Mountain National Park to our dreams for the future. He wanted to build innovative apps that would change how people connected. I wanted to shape young minds and make a difference in education. David pursued me with the kind of dedication you only see in romantic movies. Every Friday for 3 months, he showed up at my apartment with fresh flowers. Not roses or anything cliché, but wildflowers he'd picked himself during his lunch breaks. He learned my coffee order, remembered every small detail I mentioned about my students, and always texted good morning messages that made me smile before my feet even hit the floor. We got married 2 years later in a small ceremony with 80 guests at a restored barn venue outside Boulder. My dress was simple ivory lace, and David cried when he saw me walking down the aisle. His vows included a promise to support my teaching career and to always make me laugh even on the hardest days. My parents loved him immediately. My father, a retired Marine, said David was the first boyfriend of mine who looked him straight in the eye during a handshake. My mother adored how he helped with dishes after Sunday dinners without being asked. Our honeymoon in Hawaii felt like stepping into paradise. We spent 10 days on Maui, learning to surf, hiking through bamboo forests to hidden waterfalls, and watching sunsets from our beachfront room. David surprised me with a renewal of our vows on a secluded beach at sunrise, just the two of us and a local officiant. He said he wanted to marry me in as many beautiful places as possible throughout our lives. We bought our house in Colorado Springs 3 years into our marriage. It was a gorgeous 4-bedroom colonial with a wraparound porch and a massive backyard that backed up to open space. David had gotten a promotion to senior developer, and my teaching position had become permanent with excellent benefits. The neighborhood was perfect with tree-lined streets, a community pool, and an elementary school within walking distance. Emily arrived in our 3rd year of marriage, a beautiful baby girl with David's dark hair and my green eyes. David transformed into the most devoted father overnight. He handled midnight feedings without complaint, sang her to sleep with silly songs he made up on the spot, and documented every milestone with thousands of photos. 2 years later, Jake joined our family, an energetic boy who looked exactly like his father's baby pictures. 3 years ago, new neighbors moved into the house next door. Brad and Stephanie Wilson seemed like a gift from heaven at first. Brad was 35, worked in pharmaceutical sales, and had a booming laugh that made everyone around him smile. Stephanie was 29, a registered nurse at Memorial Hospital, with the kind of body that clearly spent serious time in the gym. Her long blonde hair was always perfectly styled, and she had this way of wearing yoga pants and fitted tank tops that looked both casual and deliberately attractive. We started having joint barbecues in our backyards that summer. Brad would man the grill while David mixed cocktails, and Stephanie and I would prepare sides while watching our kids play together. They didn't have children yet, but Stephanie was wonderful with Emily and Jake, always patient and engaging. We went camping together at 11 different campgrounds across Colorado. We celebrated birthdays, holidays, and random Friday nights with impromptu gatherings on one of our decks. Looking back, the signs were subtle at first. David started coming home 30 minutes later than usual, claiming new project deadlines. His phone, which used to lie randomly around the house, was suddenly always face down or in his pocket. Passwords that we'd shared for a decade were quietly changed. When I asked about it, he said it was implementing new security protocols at work. I believed him because why wouldn't I trust my husband of 15 years? The changes in David accelerated about 6 months ago. He joined a gym for the first time in our entire marriage, claiming he wanted to be healthier for the kids. His wardrobe shifted from comfortable polos and khakis to fitted shirts and designer jeans. He started using cologne daily instead of just for special occasions. He bought teeth whitening strips and actually researched skincare routines. When I complimented these changes, trying to be supportive, he barely acknowledged my words, as if my opinion no longer mattered. Stephanie began appearing at our door more frequently when Brad traveled for work, which was increasingly often. She'd need to borrow our ladder to change a light bulb, our drill to hang a picture, or simply come by for company because she was lonely. These visits always seemed to happen when I was at school. I'd come home to find her coffee mug in our sink, or catch a whiff of her perfume lingering in our kitchen. One afternoon in March, Stephanie came over to borrow our power drill. I was grading papers in the living room while David helped her with whatever project she claimed to need it for. They were in the garage for 20 minutes, and when they came back inside, Stephanie stayed for tea. I watched them from my spot at the dining table, noticed how they sat just a bit too close on the couch, how their laughter seemed to share an inside joke I wasn't part of. When I joined them, the conversation shifted immediately to weather and neighborhood gossip. 2 weeks later, I found a lipstick in David's car that wasn't mine. It was a coral shade I'd never wear, tucked between the passenger seat and the center console. My heart raced as I held it, but David had an immediate explanation. A client had left it after he'd driven the team to lunch. The client was married, he assured me, in her 60s, and had probably dropped it while getting her phone out. His explanation was so quick, so detailed, that it almost seemed rehearsed. I pushed down my doubts because the alternative was too painful to consider. Stephanie started texting David about technical problems with her phone, her laptop, her smart TV, always when Brad was gone. David would explain to me how Brad wasn't tech-savvy, so naturally they came to him for help. He'd pop over for 15 minutes that stretched into an hour. Sometimes Emily would go with him, and she'd come back talking about how Stephanie had taught her to paint her nails or braid her hair in a new style. Brad seemed oblivious to any tension. When he was home, he was the same jovial guy talking about his sales quotas, planning our next camping trip, and complaining good-naturedly about Stephanie's expensive taste in shoes. He traveled 3 weeks out of every month now, covering territory from Texas to Montana. He'd joke that he was keeping the marriage fresh by not being around enough to annoy Stephanie. Looking back, I wonder if he suspected something but chose denial over confrontation. The children started making innocent observations that set off alarm bells in my mind. Emily, now 12 and increasingly perceptive, asked why Daddy went to Stephanie's house so much when Uncle Brad wasn't home. She said it in that casual way kids do when they're genuinely curious, not accusatory. I told her Daddy was just being a helpful neighbor, but the question lodged in my chest like a splinter. Jake, 10 and unfiltered, mentioned seeing Daddy hug Stephanie in our garage one evening when I was at a parent-teacher conference. He said it was a really long hug, the kind I gave them when they were sad. When I carefully asked David about it later, he said Stephanie had been crying about struggles with fertility, and he was just comforting a friend. He seemed irritated that I'd even brought it up, making me feel guilty for questioning his compassion. I started paying closer attention without wanting to seem paranoid. I noticed David's gym schedule coincidentally matched times when Brad was traveling. I saw how Stephanie's Instagram stories showed her at the same coffee shops David frequented, though never in the same frame. Their text messages, glimpsed over his shoulder, were deleted threads, with only the most recent innocent message visible. The password to his laptop, unchanged for 5 years, was now something I didn't know. My teacher friends noticed I was distracted at work. Sarah, who taught 3rd grade, asked if everything was okay at home during lunch one day. I almost broke down and told her everything, but what would I say? that I suspected my husband might be interested in our neighbor based on changed passwords and longer hugs. It sounded paranoid even in my own head. I convinced myself I was manufacturing drama where none existed. David had never given me reason to doubt him before. 15 years of faithful marriage couldn't be erased by a few suspicious moments. Or so I desperately wanted to believe. Thursday started like any other day. I woke at 5:30 to prepare lessons for my fourth graders. David was already in the shower earlier than usual, claiming he had an important client presentation. He kissed my forehead absently as he left, smelling strongly of the new cologne he'd been wearing. Emily and Jake caught their school buses, and I headed to work with a travel mug of coffee and a stack of science tests to return. At 11:45, our principal announced over the intercom that a transformer had blown, knocking out power to half the school. With no electricity for lights, computers, or air conditioning on an unusually warm April day, they decided to dismiss everyone early. Teachers needed to stay until 12:30 to ensure all students were picked up, but after that we were free to go. This never happened, maybe once every few years, and I decided to use the unexpected free time to grocery shop without the after-school crowd. I changed my mind driving past the supermarket. The sun was shining, and I had a rare afternoon of freedom. Maybe I'd surprise David with lunch from his favorite Thai place. His presentation should be over by now. If he was too busy, I'd just leave it with the receptionist. It had been months since I'd done something spontaneous like this for us. But when I pulled into our neighborhood at 1:15, David's Tesla was in our garage. Strange. He'd specifically said he'd be in meetings all day. Maybe he'd come home to change clothes or grab something he'd forgotten. I parked on the street rather than pulling into the garage, not wanting to block him if he needed to leave quickly. The front door was locked from the inside with the chain engaged, which was odd for the middle of the day. I went around to the side door using my spare key. The house felt different immediately, though I couldn't explain why. There was an energy in the air, a charge that made the hair on my arms stand up. David's laptop bag was on the kitchen counter, his presentation materials spread across the dining table. But the house was quiet. Too quiet. Then I heard it. Laughter floating down from upstairs. Not just any laughter, but the intimate kind shared between two people who knew each other in ways they shouldn't. My feet moved on their own, carrying me silently up our carpeted stairs. Each step felt like a lifetime, my heart pounding so hard I was sure they'd hear it through the walls. The master bedroom door was open. Stephanie's purse sat on my dresser. Her sandals were kicked off beside my reading chair. A trail of clothes led to the bathroom like breadcrumbs in a twisted fairy tale. Her scrub top near the doorway. David's dress shirt by the foot of our bed. Her yoga pants draped over the bench where I sat every morning to put on my shoes. His pants in a heap by the bathroom door. The bathroom door was cracked open just enough for steam to escape and voices to carry. They were in our soaking tub, the one David had installed for our 10th anniversary, claiming every queen deserved a palace bathroom. The water was running, mixing with their voices in a symphony of betrayal. I stood frozen outside that door, my hand hovering over the handle. Part of me wanted to burst into scream and rage and throw things. But a stranger, calmer part of my brain took control. I listened instead, my ear close to the crack, my phone in my hand, recording everything. Stephanie was talking about leaving Brad. She said she was tired of pretending, tired of sleeping next to someone she didn't love anymore. She said Brad was too simple, too satisfied with mediocrity. She wanted more from life, deserved more. David's voice was soothing, promising they'd figure it out together. He said he'd been thinking about divorce too, that Miranda had become predictable, that their marriage had turned into a routine he couldn't stand anymore. They discussed timelines. 3 more months. Stephanie suggested enough time to get finances in order. David agreed, mentioning the apartment he'd already rented downtown as his future bachelor pad, though we both knew that was a lie. It was their love nest, their escape from the marriages they were pretending to maintain. The worst part was when they laughed about me. Stephanie called me sweet but clueless, said I was so trusting it was almost sad. David agreed, adding that I'd probably blame myself when he left, try to figure out what she could have done differently. They found this hilarious, the idea of boring, dependable Miranda trying to compete with exciting, adventurous Stephanie. My hand moved to the doorknob, not to open it, but to test it. It was the kind that locked from the outside, a safety feature we'd installed when the kids were toddlers to prevent them from locking themselves in. The key was still on top of the door frame where we'd always kept it. In one quiet motion, I turned the lock. The soft click was masked by their laughter and the running water. I backed away from the door, my mind racing but crystal clear. This wasn't going to end with me crying and begging for explanations. This wasn't going to be their secret that destroyed me while they walked away unscathed. If they wanted to play games with my life, my family, my home, then I was going to show them what happened when you underestimated a fourth-grade teacher who managed 25 9-year-olds every day. I walked downstairs with the calm of someone who'd already won a war that hadn't started yet. My hands weren't shaking as I picked up my phone and scrolled to Brad's contact. He answered on the third ring, his voice cheerful from whatever hotel room in Dallas he was occupying this week. The background noise suggested he was in a restaurant, probably entertaining clients over an expensive lunch. I told him everything in clear, simple sentences. His wife was in my bathtub with my husband. They were locked in and didn't know it yet. I had video evidence. The silence on his end lasted so long I thought we'd been disconnected. Then came a string of expletives that would have earned any of my students a week of detention. He said he was heading to the airport immediately, but I convinced him to wait. We deserved better than catching them wet and naked, I explained. They'd been planning and scheming for months. The least we could do was return the favor. Brad's anger transformed into something colder as he agreed. He wanted Stephanie to feel the same humiliation she'd caused him by carrying on with David under his nose in the house he paid for, while he worked himself into exhaustion to give her everything she wanted. My next call was to Jennifer Martinez, my friend from college who'd become one of Denver's most successful divorce attorneys. She answered immediately, even though I was sure she was busy. I explained the situation, and she shifted into professional mode instantly. She told me to document everything, secure my financial assets immediately, and make copies of all important documents. She could have divorce papers drawn up within hours if I wanted them. I did. The joint bank accounts were my next priority. David might have been planning his exit for months, but he'd gotten sloppy with the actual execution. I transferred 70% of our joint savings to my personal account, leaving enough that he wouldn't immediately notice, but taking what I'd contributed over the years, plus a bit extra for the emotional damages. I moved money from the vacation fund we'd been building for a trip to Europe that would clearly never happen now. I called David's company next, speaking to his manager Tom, whom I'd known for 8 years. I explained that David had a family emergency and wouldn't be able to make it back to the office today, or probably tomorrow. Tom was concerned, asking if everyone was okay. I assured him we would be eventually. Something in my tone must have conveyed the real situation, because Tom didn't push for details. Just said to tell David to take all the time he needed. The call to Memorial Hospital was trickier. I couldn't speak to Stephanie's supervisor directly, but I left a message with HR that Stephanie Wilson had a severe family emergency and would need immediate time off. I might have implied food poisoning or something contagious. The HR representative was very understanding and said they'd mark her as out for the next 48 hours and handle her shift coverage. While I made these calls, I heard the first sounds of concern from upstairs. David's voice called out, asking if someone was there. They'd finally noticed the locked door. I ignored them and continued my preparations. I went to David's home office and logged into his laptop using the password I'd figured out weeks ago. He'd used Jake's birthday combined with his favorite sports team. Men were so predictable sometimes. His email revealed the full extent of their affair. 8 months of messages ranging from professional to intimate. Pictures from a weekend trip to Aspen he'd claimed was a work conference. Hotel receipts from afternoon meetings that were clearly never about business. The apartment lease downtown in his name alone, though, references to Stephanie choosing the furniture were everywhere. Plans for a future that didn't include Brad or me, or heartbreakingly much mention of our children. I forwarded everything to Jennifer and to my personal email account. Then I sent copies to Brad, who responded immediately with more expletives and a promise that Stephanie would regret the day she met David. I also discovered David had been slowly moving money to a separate account, $500 here, $1,000 there, building his escape fund. The current balance was $23,000. I screenshot everything. The banging from upstairs grew louder. They were genuinely panicking now, shouting for help, demanding to be let out. David was threatening to break down the door, which made me laugh. That door was solid oak with reinforced hinges. We'd specifically chosen it for safety. He'd need power tools to get through it, and all those were in the garage. I texted both sets of parents, David's and mine, asking them to be available for an important video call in an hour. I said it was urgent family news that couldn't wait. My mother immediately called, but I let it go to voicemail. I needed actors in place before the show began. I arranged for Emily and Jake to go to friends' houses after school, telling the other parents I had an emergency to handle. They were used to helping each other out and didn't ask questions. Brad called back. His flight was booked landing at 6:30. He wanted to know if I'd let them out before he arrived. I told him absolutely not. They'd made their choices in that tub, and now they could sit in their choices literally. He laughed, but it was bitter and hurt. He said Stephanie had been distant for months, but he'd attributed it to work stress and their struggles with trying to conceive. The irony that she'd been preventing pregnancy while sleeping with David wasn't lost on either of us. By 4 o'clock, David and Stephanie had been locked in the bathroom for nearly 3 hours. Their initial anger had transformed into desperate pleading. They tried everything. David attempted to rationalize through the door, explaining that they could talk about this like adults. Stephanie cried dramatically, claiming she was feeling faint and needed medical attention. When that didn't work, they returned to anger, then bargaining, cycling through the stages of grief for their secret affair. I set up the living room like a presentation space. The 65-inch TV was connected to my laptop, ready to display the evidence I'd collected. I arranged chairs in a semicircle like my classroom during story time, though this story wouldn't have a happy ending for everyone. I even set out water bottles and tissues, the teacher in me unable to completely abandon hospitality even during the nuclear destruction of my marriage. The video call with the parents began at 4:30. David's parents, Margaret and Robert, joined from their home in Fort Collins. My parents, Susan and James, connected from their house across town. Everyone looked concerned, but not panicked, expecting maybe pregnancy news or job announcements. I started calmly explaining that they needed to see something important about David and our marriage. I shared my screen and played the video I'd recorded of David and Stephanie in the tub, their voices clear as they discussed leaving their spouses. I showed the emails, the hotel receipts, the apartment lease. Margaret began crying immediately, her hand over her mouth in shock. Robert's face turned red, then purple with rage. He'd raised David with strict values about honor and commitment. This betrayal of family went against everything he'd taught his son. My mother's reaction was quieter, but no less devastating. She simply said she was disappointed in David and proud of how I was handling things. My father, the former Marine, used language that would have made Brad's earlier expletives sound like nursery rhymes. He wanted to drive over immediately, but I asked him to wait. This needed to play out properly. I added Brad to the call from his hotel room. He'd clearly been drinking but wasn't drunk, just taking the edge off his pain. He introduced himself to the parents and confirmed everything from his side. He showed them text messages where Stephanie had lied about working extra shifts when she was with David. He had his own collection of evidence, credit card charges for lingerie he'd never seen, restaurant receipts from dates she'd claimed were with girlfriends. We decided together that David's brother Michael and Stephanie's sister Rachel should also know. More video calls were made, more evidence shared, more shock and anger expressed. By 5:30, both extended families were fully informed. Stephanie's parents were mortified. Her mother kept apologizing to Brad, saying she'd raised her daughter better than this. Her father wanted to fly in from Phoenix immediately. The bathroom prisoners had gone quiet for a while, but now they were arguing with each other. We could hear them blaming one another for getting caught. David accused Stephanie of being too obvious with her visits. Stephanie shot back that David was the one who insisted on meeting at our house instead of the apartment. They were turning on each other like rats in a cage, which I supposed was exactly what they were. I ordered pizza for everyone who was physically present or coming soon. The delivery guy looked confused when I answered the door, laughing at something particularly pathetic David had just shouted through the door. If only he knew he was delivering dinner to the most dramatic neighborhood show of the year. I set out plates and napkins, maintaining normalcy in the midst of chaos. At 6 o'clock, I made another decision. I texted our neighborhood group chat, the one with 43 families. I didn't share details, just said there was an emergency at our house, and to please be aware there might be some disturbance this evening. Within minutes, concerned neighbors began appearing. Karen from across the street, who'd always been suspicious of Stephanie. Tom and Linda from 2 houses down, whose own marriage had survived infidelity. The Johnsons, the Patels, the Williamses, all gathered on our front lawn like they were waiting for fireworks. When someone asked what was happening, I simply said David and Stephanie had been having an affair and were currently locked in our bathroom. The news spread through the crowd like wildfire. Some people looked shocked. Others nodded as if they'd suspected all along. Several of the women formed a protective circle around me, offering support and wine. The men mostly stood awkwardly, unsure whether to defend David or condemn him. Someone called the police, concerned about the situation. When Officer Davidson arrived, I knew him from school safety presentations. I explained the situation clearly. No one was hurt, no one was in danger, and yes, those were adults locked in my bathroom in my house. He tried not to laugh as he confirmed no crime was being committed. He did knock on the bathroom door to confirm David and Stephanie were okay physically. Their embarrassed confirmation that they were fine, but locked in, sent a ripple of laughter through the crowd outside. By the time Brad's Uber pulled up from the airport, our front yard looked like a block party gone wrong. He walked through the crowd with his head high, pulling his suitcase behind him, like a general returning from war. Several neighbors patted his back in sympathy. He hugged me on the front porch, both of us victims of the same betrayal, finding comfort in shared pain. We went inside together and I showed him the bathroom door. He stood there for a long moment, then spoke to Stephanie through the wood. His voice was calm, controlled, and absolutely devastating. He told her about the divorce lawyer he'd already contacted from Dallas, how she'd need to find somewhere else to live immediately, how her parents were flying in to help her pack, how he'd already canceled her credit cards and removed her from their joint accounts. Stephanie's wailing could be heard outside. David tried to negotiate, offering to pay for damages to make things right financially. Brad laughed and told him no amount of money could buy back trust or erase the image of another man with his wife. The neighborhood crowd had grown silent, straining to hear the drama unfolding inside. This was better than any reality TV show. At 7:30, after 5.5 hours of captivity, I decided it was time. The sun was setting, casting golden light through our windows. The crowd outside had grown to nearly 60 people. Someone had brought lawn chairs. Others were live tweeting the event. Our quiet suburban street had become ground zero for the most spectacular marriage implosion the neighborhood had ever witnessed. I announced loudly enough for David and Stephanie to hear that I was opening the door in 2 minutes. They should cover themselves with towels and prepare to leave my house immediately. The scrambling sounds from inside were almost comical. When I finally turned the key and opened the door, they stood there wrapped in my best bath towels, the ones I'd bought for our anniversary. Their faces were red from the heat, and crying their eyes, unable to meet anyone's gaze. Stephanie tried to dash past everyone, but Brad blocked her path. Not aggressively, just standing in her way long enough to say that her belongings would be on the lawn in an hour, and she should find somewhere else to sleep tonight. She broke down completely, babbling apologies that meant nothing to anyone. When she finally made it outside, the crowd parted like she had plague. Someone actually booed. She ran to her house in a towel, the ultimate walk of shame witnessed by everyone she'd smiled at during block parties and HOA meetings. David stood in our bedroom dripping and pathetic. He tried to approach me, but Michael, his brother, who'd driven down from Wyoming, stepped between us. Jennifer had arrived with the divorce papers, which she handed to David with professional efficiency. He looked at them like they were written in foreign language, unable to process how quickly his plan had unraveled. I gave him 30 minutes to pack essentials. Michael supervised, while David threw clothes into a suitcase, constantly trying to explain himself to his brother. Michael, a man of few words, simply said David had broken their mother's heart and his own trust. The relationship between the brothers would never recover, and David knew it. Family was everything to the Andersons, and David had just excommunicated himself. The moving trucks I'd scheduled arrived at 8. Professional movers began loading David's office, his gaming setup, his golf clubs, everything that was distinctly his into a storage unit he'd have to pay for. I was keeping the furniture we'd chosen together, the artwork we'd collected, the life we'd built. He could have his personal items, but the home stayed intact for our children. David tried one last time to talk to me as he stood at the front door with his suitcase. He said this wasn't how he wanted things to end. I finally spoke directly to him for the first time since locking the door. I told him he was right. He'd wanted to sneak away after building his new life, leaving me to pick up the pieces alone. Instead, he got to leave in shame, with everyone watching his affair, exposed his reputation, destroyed his family, disgusted. This wasn't how he wanted it to end, but it was exactly what he deserved. His company called while he was packing. Tom had heard through the neighborhood grapevine what had happened. He informed David that while his personal life was his own business, the company had a morality clause about conduct that reflected poorly on the firm. Using company resources, his laptop and phone to conduct an affair was grounds for review. David wouldn't be fired, but the promotion he'd been in line for was definitely off the table. The important project he'd been leading would be reassigned. Margaret and Robert arrived from Fort Collins as David was leaving. His mother couldn't even look at him. His father, a man who'd maybe hugged David 5 times in his entire life, simply shook his head and walked past his son into my house. They'd chosen their side, and it wasn't with their cheating son. They stayed with me until midnight, helping clean up, apologizing repeatedly for David's behavior, assuring me they'd always consider me their daughter and would maintain relationships with Emily and Jake. Stephanie's situation was equally devastating. Brad had indeed placed her belongings on their lawn. Her designer clothes, her jewelry, her extensive shoe collection, all in garbage bags like actual trash. Her car was in her name, thankfully for her, but Brad had already changed the locks on their house. Her sister Rachel arrived to help her load everything into her car. The neighbors watched from windows and driveways as Stephanie's life was literally bagged up and removed. The hospital called her cell phone while she was packing. Someone had informed her supervisor about the situation, probably through social media, since our drama had gone viral locally. While they couldn't fire her for having an affair, she was informed that her recent frequent absences, which she'd claimed were for medical appointments, but were clearly afternoon trysts with David, were being investigated. Her professional reputation, carefully built over years, was crumbling along with her personal life. By 10 o'clock, the street was finally quiet. The neighbors had returned to their homes with enough gossip to last months. Brad sat on my porch, both of us drinking beer and processing the day. We weren't friends exactly, but we were bonded by this unique trauma. He told me Stephanie had texted begging for forgiveness, claiming it was just a mistake. 8 months of sneaking around wasn't a mistake. It was a calculated betrayal. He blocked her number mid-conversation. Emily and Jake came home at 10:30, driven by their friend's confused mother. I sat them down and explained in age-appropriate terms that Dad had made bad choices and would be living somewhere else. Emily, perceptive as always, asked if it was because of Stephanie. When I confirmed it, she said she wasn't surprised. She'd felt something was wrong for months. Jake was more upset, worried this meant no more camping trips or baseball practices with Dad. I assured him David would still be their father, just from a different address. 6 months have passed since that Thursday afternoon when I locked David and Stephanie in our bathroom. The divorce was finalized last month, one of the fastest Jennifer had ever handled, thanks to David's eagerness to escape the situation. He agreed to everything: generous alimony, child support, and 60-40 custody in my favor. The house is mine as it should be. This is where our children feel safe and stable. David lives in that downtown apartment now, the one he'd originally gotten for his secret life with Stephanie. Ironically, he lives there alone. Their grand romance couldn't survive the harsh light of exposure. Without the thrill of secrecy, they discovered they didn't actually like each other that much. The fantasy of forbidden love was more appealing than the reality of two selfish people who'd destroyed their families for temporary pleasure. Emily and Jake have adjusted remarkably well. Emily told me last week that she's proud of how I handled everything. At 12, she's learned valuable lessons about self-respect and consequences. Jake still enjoys his time with David, but has mentioned that Dad seems sad and lonely. Children see truth even when adults try to hide it. They both attend counseling sessions, which have helped them process the changes. Their therapist says they're thriving despite the disruption, crediting the stability I've maintained at home. Stephanie moved to Phoenix, living with her parents while she rebuilds her life. The nursing community in Colorado Springs is surprisingly small, and word traveled fast about her affair with a patient's husband, even though David was never her patient. She found work at a clinic there, starting over, where nobody knows her story. Her Instagram, once filled with perfect couple photos and yoga poses, has been dormant since that day. Brad heard through mutual friends that she's in therapy dealing with the consequences of her choices. Brad and I have become unexpected friends through this ordeal. We check in on each other weekly, sometimes grabbing coffee or dinner. There's no romantic element, just two people who understand each other's specific pain. He's dating someone new, a teacher from my school actually, someone who values honesty and commitment. Watching him heal gives me hope for my own future recovery. The neighborhood has been incredibly supportive. Karen from across the street brings over casseroles when she sees I've had a long day. The Johnsons include Emily and Jake in their family activities, making sure they never feel isolated. Our street's infamous drama has actually brought everyone closer together. We joke that David and Stephanie's affair was the best thing to happen to neighborhood unity in years. My teaching has improved, oddly enough. Going through personal hell gave me deeper empathy for my students dealing with family struggles. I recognize the signs now of children processing divorce or family conflict. I've become the teacher others send struggling kids to, knowing I'll understand without judgment. My principal commented that I seem more confident, more assertive. Surviving betrayal and orchestrating that spectacular confrontation apparently brought out strength I didn't know I had. I've started dating recently, nothing serious yet. Marcus, the yoga instructor at my new studio, asked me for coffee after months of gentle flirting. He's patient, understanding that I'm not ready to rush into anything. He knows my story, everyone in town does, and respects the walls I've built. When he makes me laugh during warrior pose, I remember that joy still exists after trauma. He doesn't push, doesn't pressure, just exists as a reminder that good men still exist. The financial settlement has provided unexpected freedom. Between the alimony and my teaching salary, I'm more comfortable than we ever were as a married couple. I'm taking the kids to Europe this summer, the trip David and I had planned but never taken. Emily wants to see the Eiffel Tower. Jake wants to eat authentic Italian pizza. I want to stand in beautiful places and remember that the world is bigger than one man's betrayal. David has attempted reconciliation twice. Both times he showed up with flowers and rehearsed apologies, claiming he'd made a terrible mistake. I listened politely, then showed him the door. Some mistakes are too big for forgiveness. Some betrayals break things that can't be repaired. He chose Stephanie over our family, chose excitement over stability, chose selfishness over commitment. Now he gets to live with those choices alone in his bachelor apartment, seeing his children every other weekend. The locked bathroom door has become something of a legend in our social circle. Friends from college who heard the story call it the most brilliant revenge they've ever witnessed. Jennifer, my divorce attorney, says she's used it as a cautionary tale for other clients considering affairs. The fact that I remained calm, strategic, and ruthless in my execution has earned me a reputation as someone not to be crossed. I rather like this new version of myself. Margaret and Robert David's parents remain in our lives. They attend every school play, every baseball game, every birthday party. Margaret told me privately that she's written David out of her will, though she's established trusts for Emily and Jake. The betrayal of family values hit her harder than any of David's previous mistakes. She sees me as the daughter she wished she'd had someone who upholds the principles she tried to instill in her children. Looking back, the signs were so clear. The gym membership, the new cologne, the secretive phone behavior, the emotional distance. But we see what we want to see, believe what we need to believe to keep our world intact. I needed to believe my husband loved me, that our family was solid, that 15 years meant something. The truth was hiding in plain sight in every late night at Stephanie's house, every deleted text message, every lie about client dinners. What would you do if you discovered your spouse was cheating? Would you confront them immediately in rage and pain? Would you gather evidence quietly and leave with dignity? Or would you orchestrate something spectacular, ensuring the cheaters faced maximum consequences for their choices? After reading my story, I want to know what you think. Leave a comment below sharing your thoughts on revenge versus forgiveness. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more real-life experiences. Share this video with anyone who needs to know they're not alone in surviving betrayal. Thank you for listening to my journey from betrayal to triumph. Remember that your worth isn't determined by someone else's inability to see it. Stay strong, trust your instincts, and never accept less than complete respect in your relationships.